There is a silent prison that most people live in without ever realizing it. It has no walls, no bars, no visible boundaries, and yet it controls everything. It controls how you act, how you speak, how you think, how you live your life. This prison is not built by society. It is built inside your own mind. And its foundation is simple: the fear of what other people think about you. From a very young age, you were taught something without even noticing it. You were taught to adjust, to behave, to fit in, to be accepted. And slowly over time, you learned that approval meant safety, that being liked meant belonging, that being accepted meant survival. And so, without realizing it, you began to shape yourself around others. You learned what to say, what not to say, what to show, what to hide. You learned how to present yourself in a way that would avoid rejection. And for a while this worked. It helped you navigate the world. It helped you feel included. It helped you feel secure. But there is a hidden cost to this. A cost that becomes more apparent as you grow. Because the more you adapt yourself to fit others, the further you move away from who you actually are. And one day, you begin to feel it. A sense of disconnection. A sense that something is off. You look at your life, and everything might seem fine on the surface. But inside, something feels empty. Something feels forced. Something feels inauthentic. And you cannot fully explain why. But if you look closely, the answer is there. You are not living your life. You are living a version of yourself that was shaped by the expectations of others. You are living according to what you think will be accepted, what you think will be approved, what you think will be liked. And in doing so, you have lost something essential. You have lost your authenticity. Carl Jung believed that one of the greatest psychological challenges a person faces is this: the courage to become who you truly are. Because becoming who you truly are requires something difficult. It requires you to stop living for the approval of others. And that is not easy. Because the fear of judgment is deeply rooted. It is not just a thought. It is a feeling that appears whenever you consider stepping outside of what is expected. A feeling that says, what will they think? What if they judge me? What if they reject me? What if I am not accepted? And that feeling can be strong enough to stop you, to keep you in place, to keep you from expressing yourself, from taking risks, from making decisions that align with who you really are. And so, you stay within the boundaries. You stay within what feels safe. But here is the truth. Safety and authenticity are often in conflict, because to be authentic means to risk judgment. It means to risk not being understood. It means to risk being different, and most people are not willing to take that risk. So they choose safety, they choose approval, they choose acceptance. But in doing so, they sacrifice something deeper. They sacrifice themselves. Jung described this as the development of the persona, the mask you wear to navigate the social world, the version of yourself that is designed to be accepted. And while the persona is necessary to some extent, it becomes dangerous when it takes over. When it becomes your identity, when you begin to believe that the mask is who you are, because then you lose connection with your true self. And the more you identify with the persona, the more dependent you become on external validation. You begin to need approval. You begin to seek reassurance. You begin to measure your worth based on how others perceive you. And that creates a cycle where your sense of self is no longer internal. It becomes external. It depends on others, on their opinions, on their reactions, on their approval. And that makes you fragile. Because now your identity is not stable. It can change based on how others see you. If someone approves of you, you feel good. If someone criticizes you, you feel bad. If someone rejects you, you feel like you are not enough. And this creates a constant state of emotional instability because you are always reacting to something outside of your control. And that is the problem. You cannot control what other people think. You cannot control how they perceive you. You cannot control their opinions. And yet, if you base your life on those things, you give away your power. You allow others to determine how you feel, how you act, how you live. And Jung would say that this is one of the greatest illusions, the illusion that other people's opinions define you. But they don't. They never have. What other people think of you is shaped by their own experiences, their own beliefs, their own limitations, their own projections. It has very little to do with who you actually are. And yet, we treat it as if it is truth. We treat it as if it is something we must obey, something we must adapt to. But the moment you begin to see this clearly, something changes. You begin to question, why am I letting this control me? Why am I adjusting my life based on something I cannot control? Why am I sacrificing my authenticity for approval that is never guaranteed? And those questions begin to shift your perspective. You begin to realize that the fear of judgment is not as solid as it seems. It is not a fixed reality. It is a perception, a mental construct, something that exists in your mind. And once you see that, you begin to create distance from it. You begin to observe it instead of reacting to it. You begin to notice when it appears, when you hesitate to speak, when you hold back your thoughts, when you change your behavior to fit in. And in those moments, you have a choice. You can continue to act from fear, or you can begin to act from awareness. And that is where the process begins, not by completely eliminating the fear, but by becoming aware of it, by recognizing it, by understanding it, and slowly choosing not to be controlled by it. This is not something that happens overnight. It is a process, a gradual shift, because you are not just changing your behavior. You are changing the way you relate to yourself. You are moving from external validation to internal validation, from dependence to independence, from fear to awareness. And that requires consistency. It requires repetition. It requires you to face discomfort again and again. Because every time you choose authenticity over approval, you will feel resistance. You will feel that voice that says, this is risky. This is uncomfortable. This might not be accepted. But every time you act despite that voice, you weaken its control. You show yourself that you can handle it, that you can survive judgment, that you can exist without constant approval. And over time, that builds confidence. Real confidence. Not the kind that depends on others, but the kind that comes from within. The kind that is based on self-trust, because that is what this process ultimately leads to. Trusting yourself, trusting your thoughts, trusting your decisions, trusting who you are. And when you reach that point, something changes. You are no longer constantly thinking about what others might think. You are no longer adjusting every action. You are no longer filtering every thought. You begin to act more freely, more naturally, more honestly, and that creates a different experience of life, a lighter experience, a more authentic experience. Because you are no longer carrying the weight of constant self-monitoring. You are no longer living in that invisible prison. You are free, not because people stop judging, but because you stop caring, not in a careless way, but in a conscious way, in a way that recognizes that your life is yours, not theirs. And that is the key, because at the end of the day, no one else lives your life. No one else experiences your thoughts. No one else carries your emotions. No one else deals with the consequences of your choices. Only you do. So why should others determine how you live? Why should their opinions limit your expression? Why should their judgments define your path? They shouldn't. And once you truly understand that, something shifts. You begin to reclaim your life. You begin to make decisions based on what feels true to you. Not based on what is expected, not based on what is approved, but based on what is real. And that is where true freedom begins. Not in changing the world, but in changing your relationship to it. Not in controlling others, but in no longer being controlled by them. And that is what Jung meant when he spoke about becoming who you truly are. It is not about becoming perfect. It is not about becoming fearless. It is about becoming aware. Aware of the forces that shape your behavior. Aware of the fears that limit you. Aware of the patterns that keep you stuck. And once you are aware, you have the power to change, not all at once, but step by step, choice by choice, moment by moment. And over time, those choices create a new way of being. A way of being that is not dependent on others. A way of being that is grounded in self-awareness. A way of being that is authentic. And that is where real strength lies, not in being accepted by everyone, but in being true to yourself, even if that means not being accepted by everyone. Because the truth is this: you cannot be fully accepted by others if you are not fully yourself. And once you accept that, you stop trying to please everyone. You stop trying to fit into every expectation. You stop trying to control how you are perceived. And you begin to focus on something else, living your life fully, honestly, authentically. And that is where everything changes. Because when you stop caring what others think, you do not lose anything real. You only lose the illusion that was holding you back. And what remains is something much more valuable: yourself.